Hey AP World, Miss Z here for Time Machine Teacher, and we are going to be doing Unit 3 of the DBQ. I have a little bit different setup today. I've got my TV screen over here because I'm using that as a second screen to be able to see your comments, and my computer in front of me. So if you see me looking over in that direction, that's why. Anyway, down in the description, I have for you the DBQ organizer that we're going to be using today to go over Unit 3 DBQ, as well as the Unit 3 DBQ. So once you get in here, make sure that you download both of those so that you can follow along. And just drop in the comments. Let me know when you're here. Let me know if you have any questions as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Unit 3 DBQ from the AMSCO book. So if you have access to the AMSCO book, you're more than welcome to check it out there. But I also have it in the description for you. So make sure and grab that. So your prompt is, using the documents and your knowledge of world history, evaluate the extent to which Peter the Great took steps during his reign from 1682 to 1725 to modernize Russia and to transform it into a major European power. So we're looking at that prompt. Hi, Fatine, welcome in. Go ahead and grab the documents links down in the description. I just got started. I'll wait for you, though, to grab those. We have the DBQ link down in the description, as well as the DBQ organizer that we're going to be using tonight. And while you're grabbing those, I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit bigger on my screen here so that you can see it better. There we go. That might be better. Actually, we'll just do it like this. There we go. And let me make this as big as I possibly can. Boom. There we go. I don't know why that's showing up. I don't want that right now. Thank you very much. Get out of here, buddy. Okay. All right, so we're going to get started. Let me know if you had any problems finding the links. They should be in the description, though. Okay, so we're going to look at Unit 3 DBQ, and the prompt is about Peter the Great and to what extent he modernized Russia and transformed it. So if you look at your DBQ organizer, the very first thing we have is, what is the historical skill? The historical skill that we're looking at here is change, because it's to what extent did he modernize and transform Russia. That gives you a little bit of a hint that it's about change. It doesn't go with anything else, right? We can't really compare that because it's not asking for us to compare it to someplace else, and we can't really do similarities and differences. So change would be your best bet there. So in your DBQ organizer, that's what it is, change, right away. We know that. All right, then what kind of change? What are we comparing? We're not comparing anything. So what kind of change is it? Well, I need to know, to what extent did he modernize and transform Russia? So modernizing and transforming. And what extent did he do that? So we could put in here, like, to what level did he do that? So if you know anything about Peter the Great, you know that he definitely modernized and changed Russia, and he did it quite drastically through decrees. And that's probably what our documents are going to talk about. The time period would be his reign, 1682 to 1725. So we've got our basic information there. Can you guys see the screen okay? I think that's as big as I can get it. Let me try a little bit bigger. That looks pretty good. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is read our documents. Now, like I said in the last couple of videos, you're going to have about 10 to 15 minutes to do this. So you want to try to do it quickly, but you also want to try to do it at the best of your ability, so you don't have to go back and you don't have to go back and read the documents again. The change of trade, maybe. It depends on what the document's talking about, right? So it's how he changed and transformed Russia. How did he bring it into the modern era? Okay. And so that's what we're looking at here. So we have to kind of wait and read the document to find out exactly how he did that. But we do know that it goes with the historical skill of change. Okay. All right, so let's look at document 1. This is from Bishop Burnet of England, and it's describing Peter the Great in 1698. Let's see if I can get this up here on the screen for you, just in case you want to see it that way. There we go. Okay. So document 1. Perfect. Bishop Burnet of England describing Peter the Great. So this is an outsider. He's not Russian. So remember that. It says he was desirous to understand our doctrine, but he did not seem disposed to mend matters in the Russian Empire. He was indeed resolved to encourage learning and to polish his people by sending some of them to travel in other countries and to draw strangers to come and live among them. He seemed apprehensive still of his sister's intrigues. There was a mixture of both passion and severity in his temper. He is resolute, but understands little of war and seemed not at all inquisitive that way. Okay, so that is our document. What do we need to find out? Well, we need to describe this document. So, describing document 1. Let's see what we got over here. Fatine says, Peter the Great was trying to modernize by visiting different countries like China. Yes, very good. So that Fatine could possibly be some outside evidence. Let's keep that on the back burner. Ashley, I'm not sure what you mean politically. Like, is he changing it politically? Could be. We have to wait and read our documents. All right, so document 1, describing it. What's the main idea of that document? Well, it talks about how Peter the Great was he was interested in education of the Russian people, right? That's one of the things that he is doing, and he's encouraging this learning in his people. So you could put something like education of his people. That's what he's interested in. That's what this bishop is saying he is trying to do. Is there anything else from document 1 that you want to throw in there as a description of that document? If so, put it in the comments and we will add it to our chart. Now, supporting. What kind of change is this? How could we narrow that down into a topic and decide what change this would be? Well, it's definitely a change in education, right? Because it's going from the people not being educated to being more educated. Now, remember, here's your key thing with change that you have to do. In order to get your points, you have to say what it was like before the change and what it's like after the change. You have to describe both. So in this case, we would talk about how education wasn't very predominant before this time. But as Peter the Great is traveling, he wants to change that. So supporting the main idea of this one is educational changes or changes in education. And what can we pull from the document to talk about that? Well, the bishop says that he wants to make Russians, I'm just going to put R for Russian, he wants to make Russians learn the ways of Europeans. So that's something from the document that we could use when we are supporting this information. And he's encouraging them to travel in order to learn. So you can also add that in there. Oh, I don't know what just happened. What did I do? I'm sorry. I don't know what I just did. I pressed something and it was the wrong thing to press, apparently. There we go. Oh my goodness. There we go. Okay. What a mess. Totally ruined this thing. Okay. Let me zoom up on this again. Okay, here you go. So he's encouraging them to travel and encouraging them to learn the ways of Europeans. So Fatine says, inspiring to trade in document 1. Does it talk about trade in document 1? I'm not sure he mentioned trade. Why is my computer so weird today? It's so weird today. Hold on just a second, guys. I got to get the documents back up here for you. All right, so look over that document real quick again while I'm grabbing the DBQ documents. I'm not sure that he really talked about trade in there. Check and see if, I mean, could be. Maybe I missed it. Let's look. He says that he wants them to travel to other countries, to draw strangers to come in to live in Russia, and he's not really interested in war. So that's not top on his list. He's basically top on his list is education and making people want to learn more. Okay, so I didn't really see anything about trade. If you can see something specifically that you want to talk about, then put it in the comments. Okay. Now I got to turn the Zoom off. Oh, for goodness sake. Okay, there we go. Okay. Ah! Technology hates me tonight. Like, seriously. I'm just trying to turn Zoom off. Why won't it go off? Zoom in. I don't want you to zoom in anymore. Zoom out. Okay. How do I get back to just text box here, buddy? Oh, technical issues. It's so great. Here we go. Okay, moving on now. So now we need to explain this. Well, we have a couple choices. Remember, we have point of view, we have purpose, we have audience. I would suggest for this one, you could do point of view because this guy is a bishop. So he's from England. He's not Russian. So that's going to give him a little bit different point of view. Yes, Fatine, technical issues, that's for sure. Okay, so you're asking if it could be trade. I don't think there's anything really in there that you could use to prove that he wants to trade more. Just more about education. I think that's what you should focus on, and that he wants people to travel and learn from the Europeans. So if we're going to do point of view of this, remember your questions are, who is the author? What do they believe, and why do they believe it? So he's the bishop from England. He believes Peter the Great is trying to improve education, but he's not really interested in the religion of England or in the ways of war, just how to be educated. And the point of view part is he believes this because he's an outsider, so he can have an honest opinion, and it really doesn't affect him because Peter the Great is not his king. So you can say that he is a bishop of England. He believes Peter the Great, I'm just going to abbreviate it. He believes Peter the Great is interested only in education and not in war or religion. And he can be honest because he's not Russian. You could also put in there that because he sees Peter the Great, firsthand, that he might have like some kind of a relationship with him, like a friendship almost. Maybe that's pushing it a little bit too far. All right, so NNE says, sorry, since I just joined the live, but is there an outline? Yes, there is an outline. And the DBQ, it is in the description. Just click on those links and you can grab that. Now, another good way to explain this document, you could probably do purpose pretty easily. You could maybe say that the purpose was to inform the English of the reason of Peter the Great's visit and that he writes honestly about that. So you could say the purpose to inform okay, and that he writes honestly. So either one of those would work. Purpose is a little bit shorter to write, so if you're running out of time, you might want to do that one instead. Now, this one went down into document 2 a little bit, so I'm just going to fix that real quick so that we can keep this organized. Maybe I'll fix it if I can figure out where my, oh my goodness. Oh, it's probably because I've got it zoomed up. Okay, well, regardless, there's your information about that. We'll just have to delete it when we get there. Okay, so document 2. Let's go on to document 2. Does anybody have any questions about document 1? Pretty straightforward information about education and the fact that Peter the Great wants Russians to be more educated, like the Europeans. Okay, document 2 is Peter the Great's decree on compulsory education of the Russian nobility. So a decree is like a law. Okay, so keep that in mind. 15 says, just a moment, did Russia build schools while Bishop was talking about this? Yeah, I mean, Peter the Great will make schooling more compulsory, like, I'm not saying that word right, but like mandatory, okay? But the bishop probably wouldn't have known about that as much because the bishop doesn't go back to Russia with him. Does that make sense? Okay, let me know if that makes sense. Okay, so document 2, Peter the Great's decree. So this is his law demanding that the Russian nobility get educated. And it says, send to every region some persons from mathematical schools to teach the children of the nobility, except those of freeholders and government clerks. Mathematics and geometry as a penalty. No one will be allowed to marry unless he learns these subjects. So to describe that one, this is a decree or a law that noble children will learn math and geometry. Most noble children, right? The ones that are exempt are the freeholders and government clerks' children. So most noble children will learn math and geometry. Remember that a decree means law. Now, this would also be a change in education. So we can put that with document number 1 because document number 1 talks about that too. And something that we could support from this is that it's so important to Peter the Great that if you don't get educated, then you will not be able to get married as a child of nobility. So you could put down that it's so important to Peter the Great that if you don't do this, you can't get married. Ashley, it could be social change, yes, but remember, we're trying to group these documents together. So you want to try to find groups and ways to put these documents together, all right? And so because this first document is also about education, we could prove that education was a way that he modernized and the way that he transformed Russia. So if you have another document that talks about social change, you might be able to put these two together, but I would say that this would be better to put with education. If you want to, though, you absolutely can put it together with social change. It just depends on how the documents kind of group up. So you could put right here change in education or social change. Either one would be fine. This one could kind of be social change too, though, right? So it just depends on how you want to group your documents up. Okay, so point of view for this one. Well, it's coming from Peter the Great. What does he think? He thinks that education is important because he's had the opportunity to travel. He has seen what education has done for the rest of Europe, and he wants his people to be able to compete. So you should put something down for point of view. Remember, point of view is always outside of that person. So because he is czar and he is educated, and he's traveled. He wants his people to be educated as well in order to compete with the rest of Europe. And he feels this way because of his social status, right? He's upper class. Maybe if he weren't as traveled or weren't as educated himself, he might not feel this way. So he writes from an upper class point of view. Oops. There we go. I'll leave that on there just for a second while I'm looking at the questions here. So we've got, have you already formed your thesis? No, we have not formed our thesis, but we did find out that the historical change or the historical skill is change. So we'll be grouping by changes. Fatine says, so mandatory law for Russian upper class. Yes, except for, it did have some exceptions, except for the freeholders and government clerks. I would have to look up what they mean by freeholders. I'm not exactly sure. But the government clerks, those would probably be like a little bit lower nobility. And so most likely he's exempting them because they're not as high in the noble structure or something like that. That kind of a detail, though, you don't really have to know in order to write this. Okay, let's go on to document 3. Document 3 is another decree from Peter the Great, and it's a decree on Western dress. It's a little bit longer, so we're going to try to read it quickly. Now, as we're reading this, take notes on what are the changes. Put some notes on your paper under the describes part so that you're ready for that when we get to it. So it says, Western dress shall be worn by the boyars, members of our councils and our court, gentry of Moscow, secretaries, provincial gentry, ghosty or merchants, government officials, Streltsky members of the guild, purveying for our household, citizens of Moscow of all ranks, and residents of provincial cities, expecting the clergy and peasant tillers, expecting, that was the right word, expecting the clergy and peasant tillers of the soil. The upper dress shall be of French and Saxon cut, and the lower dress, waistcoat, trousers, boots, shoes, and hats shall be of German type. They shall also ride German saddles. Likewise, the women folk of all ranks, including the priests, deacons, and church assistants' wives, the wives of the dragoons, the soldiers, and the Streltsky and their children shall wear Western dresses, hats, jackets, and underwear, undervests, and petticoats, and shoes. From now on, no one of the above mentioned is to wear Russian dress or Caucasian coats, sheepskin coats, or Russian peasant coats, trousers, boots, or shoes. It is also forbidden to ride Russian saddles, and the craftsmen shall not manufacture them or sell them at the marketplace. Okay, great. Fatine says freeholder means elective legislative of government level. Okay, cool. Thank you for looking that up. I appreciate that. Okay, so for document 3, how could we describe this? What is the main idea? Well, the gist of the main idea is that Russian cultural dress will no longer be allowed, Western dress only. No cultural dress. Does this apply to everyone? Yes. All ranks of people. This could be a social change, NNE. It could absolutely be a social change. It could be a cultural change. You could go with either one of them. Okay, Ashley, you might be able to use that in your outside evidence about The Last Samurai. You could use that as a comparison. Sure, good. I'm liking the thoughts you guys are coming up with. This is great. Okay, so the supports part, we have the describe. How could we support this? Well, if we're going to go with a change of social change or cultural change or change in customs, anything would be good in that way. You guys can pick. Let's go with the social change, because that's the first one that I heard. And we're going to say, how could we support this? Well, we need to pull some examples from the text. We need to say something like, Russian cultural dress to Western dress for all ranks of people. We put that in the description. Russian dress of any kind was not allowed. Even Russian saddles were not allowed. They were not allowed to manufacture it. And even women had to dress in Western dress. So you could just simply say, no Russian clothes allowed. No Russian saddles. No manufacturing of these things. Any of those things you could pull from the text. I'm basically just taking information from the text, putting it into my own words to be able to prove this cultural change. Fatine says, so Peter the Great was interested in outside culture. Yeah, he was interested in outside culture, but he really, really liked the European ways, and he liked their modernization techniques and like how they were modern. And that was really important to him. And he knew that the Russians were not on level with that. So he wanted to bring them up to that level, probably to compete economically, and then also just because he really, really liked European ways from when he traveled. Okay, so to explain this one, we could probably do audience for this one pretty easily. Who is the audience for this document, do you think? Remember, this is a decree or a law that Peter the Great put out. So who would the audience be? Any ideas, ladies? I think we're all ladies. And Annie, you might not be a lady. Let me know. Good. And Annie, yes, that's right. So Russian citizens, absolutely. So the audience is Russian citizens or Russian people. How does that affect the writing of the document? Well, he's trying to show his authority, right? Is he giving them a choice? No. So because he is the all-powerful czar, they don't have a choice. And that comes across in the document. That comes across in how he was speaking, right? He's speaking with authority. So because of this, he speaks with authority. Okay, great. So we got all ladies here. That's right. Ladies holding down the fort. That's because boys, they're not going to do as well on this test as you ladies, right? Because you guys are preparing. Maybe the boys are going to watch later because they're too shy to ask questions. Who knows? We'll see. All right. Document 4. So we're moving on. Oh, Fatine's a boy. Oh, sorry, Fatine. Well, okay. We'll allow you in even if you're a boy, Fatine. No problem. You can be in our club. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Okay. It's hard when I can't see you guys. Like, I wish I could see you guys like a Zoom call. That'd be really fun. All right. So document 4 is the statute for colleges of manufacture, 1723. So this is another law. Okay. And it says, His Imperial Majesty is diligently striving to establish and develop in the Russian Empire such manufacturing plants and factories as are found in other states. So he's trying to have manufacturing as they have in Europe and other places, right? For general welfare and prosperity of his subjects, so to better their lives. If you can, as you're reading these, write down notes right away, and then you'll have your description already done. He therefore most graciously charges the College of Manufacturers to exert itself in devising the means to introduce with the least expense and to spread in the Russian Empire these and other ingenious arts, and especially those for which materials can be found within the empire. His Imperial Majesty gives permission to everyone, without distinction of rank or condition, to open factories whenever he may find suitable. Factory owners must be closely supervised in order that they have at their plants good and experienced foreign master craftsmen who are able to train Russians in such a way that these in turn may themselves become masters, so that they produce and bring glory to the Russian manufacturers. Okay, so our description. Peter the Great wants to open more factories in order to benefit the Russians. Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to make this on like a Word doc. I was like trying to be smart and put it on this because it was easier to like flow it out and stuff, but it's definitely not easy to type on. Okay, so he wants to open more factories. Now, what change would this go with? We've got a social change. We have the change of education. You could probably put it with either one. I would say that it closely relates to education, though, because of that part that he talks about how he's bringing foreign master craftsmen into Russia to train them and to get them to learn more. Now, you could also say economic change. Sure, absolutely. However, that would mean that you have to write 3 paragraphs because you'd have to have one on education, one on culture, and one on economic change. And remember, our time is very limited for this. If you think you've got time to do that, though, by all means, go for it. But I would suggest, since we have such a limited time, to put this with the change of education. And you could use the part about how he's bringing in foreigners to train the Russians and how to work in these factories. I would suggest the least amount possible, but probably you're going to have at least 2 body paragraphs because most likely you're not going to be able to use the documents all for one topic. You're probably going to have to split them up like what we're doing tonight. So 2 would be great. If you have to do 3, if you absolutely can't figure out how to make the documents work together, then do 3. But it's 45 minutes is just not very long at all. You guys are going to really struggle with that. And so that's why we're trying to do the least amount possible and put them in the least amount of groups. Okay, so the purpose. Well, once again, purpose, this is a mandate. So to inform the people, he is czar. It's under his authority. And it's important that they compete on a world stage. So you could put something like the purpose to inform the people of opening more factories. Now, how does this affect the writing? It's very authoritarian because he is czar and he's trying to show them his authority and show them how important this is. Now, once again, this is just your notes. So the more that you can put on here, the faster that you can fill this up, the better you're going to be when it comes to writing this. Okay. Document 5. Also, if you don't have a printer at home, you can just write this outline real quickly on a piece of paper. You don't have to worry about printing it out. All right, let's look at document 5 real quick. Document 5 is the portrait of Peter the Great. I'll show it real quick here. Right, here's the portrait. It says portrait of Peter the Great. That's all the information that we have about him. So to describe it, we would simply say it's a portrait of Peter the Great in Western style dress. I can spell. Okay. We already know that he supports that style of clothing, right? So what could we use to support? Well, we have our changes of education. We have our cultural changes or our social changes. So which one do you think you would throw this with? Da, 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 da. Yes, very good. Cultural changes. Is that what we went with? Did we say cultural? No, we said social changes. So I would put this with the social changes because it shows that he's supporting that by how he's dressed, right? It's showing that he wants to switch to Western clothing. And you're right, Ashley. It also shows he's in charge and he is powerful, or it legitimizes his power. Remember how we talked about how they would legitimize their power through art? So you could say that because he's wearing Western clothes, it shows his support. And legitimizes his power. So he's identifying with the changes that he wants to make in Russia. Now, I'm going to get rid of this so that we have more space over here. If you're going to explain this, I would say that the purpose is to legitimize his power and to get respect from the people. How does that affect how this is painted? Well, it's obviously going to show that he's very powerful. And so you could reference the fact that he's holding a sword and his hand is resting on top of a cannon. Possibly the map could signify that he wants Russia to be great and expand. So you could say the artist does this through the picture of a sword, cannon, and map to show expansion and greatness of Russia, or something like that. Whenever you have a picture, you want to make sure and reference that picture. Super important. If you don't talk about the picture or the fact that the artist put something into that artwork or something like that, then you may not get the points for that. So NNE says document 5 could be social change to show how Peter the Great used his own decree to demonstrate the adoption of foreign clothing rather than traditional Russian attire. That's fantastic. Yes, very good. And NNE says, could audience be used? Yeah, absolutely. Any of those could be used, but then you could use the same. Yeah, absolutely. You're on point with that. You could say the audience is the Russian people and he's using this to legitimize his power. And he does that through picturing the cannon and the map and the sword. Good. Fatine says, will you start writing the thesis after you analyze the documents? Yes, that's what we're going to go to next. So on the next part of your little organizer here, you have groupings. So how are these documents going to be grouped? Well, we already kind of grouped them when we were going through, and we said 1, 2, and 4 are the change of education. And then for our second group, we said that 3 and 5 were the social changes. Now, the social change was dress, right? So you could say in social change from cultural dress to Western style. And then you basically have your thesis, right? Change of education, social change of the cultural dress. So I'm going to give you a quick minute to look over that and see if you can write a thesis from both of those groups. Oh, no, it's okay. And you ask me as many questions as you want. That's the reason I'm doing a live. So absolutely. So you say, but with the new rubric, would you suggest for us to use? I would try to use all the documents provided. Yeah. At the end of this, I'm going to talk about some things that you can do if you're running out of time. And one of those things is to not use all the documents, but we'll get to that at the end. For right now, as we're practicing it, we're going to use all the documents, and hopefully when you get actually to it, you can do that as well. Okay, so thesis. Now, our thesis can vary because, it doesn't have to be the same one. But this is the one that I came up with. I said, Peter the Great. Let me get this off of underline. There we go. Okay, so Peter the Great used his absolute rule to modernize and transform Russia from an uneducated state to more education, and he ordered the change. Oh, we're going to put social in there. The social change of dress from Russian cultural style to a more Western style. Now, what I want you to notice about this is I talked about what it was like before the change. They were uneducated, and then they get more education. They also had Russian cultural style dress and then Western style dress. It's important that you put both of those in there. For change, you always have to talk about what it's like before and after the change. Now, last week I had some kids asking me about the unicorn point, that very last point that's really difficult to get. One way that you can get that is by explaining a continuity. If you're talking about change, you can also explain a continuity. So this one would be easy to get that point, because one thing that stays the same during his reign that he does not modernize is the institution of serfdom. He keeps that going. So you could write, despite these changes, the institution of serfdom continued throughout his reign. Now, here's the thing. You can't really prove this from any of the documents, but they might make an exception to that this time since you don't have as many documents, and if you explain it really well. Now, once again, that last point is not the most important point. All the other points are more important. So if you're running out of time, then don't even worry about this. I'm just showing this to you just in case you have time. All right, then the next thing you're going to do is plan out your context. Now, I would suggest that you don't even write a lot here on this outline. Maybe just put a couple of words that you can kind of like prompt yourself when you're going to write the context. Also, after you get your thesis and you get to that point, I would check how much time you have left. If you only have 30 minutes, then don't even waste your time writing context here on your outline. Go ahead and just throw it down on the paper. Okay, so some things that are going on before Peter the Great's reign. We have the gunpowder empires, Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal. They're expanding through their use of gunpowder and force. So you could put gunpowder empires here. Now, once again, you're probably not going to have a ton of time. So if you're running out of time, just go ahead and start writing it. Another thing that we could put down is Ivan the Terrible rules before Peter the Great, and he expands Russia because of the fur trade. And you could also put that Peter the Great comes to power by overthrowing his sister. Now, the important part of context is that you have to tie this in somehow. It has to be associated to these changes. So what is causing him to want these changes? Well, the reason he wants these changes, I think somebody said it in the stream above in the chat, is that he goes and he travels and he really likes what he's seeing throughout Europe. So you want to throw something in like that so that it connects to the prompt. So Fatine says, Peter the Great modernized Russia with the change of Russian education and culture to European style to keep up his country in terms of production, trade, education, and culture. Is that for your thesis, I'm assuming? That's not bad. I would suggest then just make sure in your paragraphs that you're talking about what it's like before and after that change, right? So that you can show change. Because if you're just talking about what it's like after, that doesn't technically show change the way that the College Board wants to see it. Okay, so if we're starting with our thesis, we basically have the same two things for our thesis. We've got some things for context. Outside evidence, we'll talk about as we get into actually writing this. So let's talk now about how we could write this. I'm going to throw back up here on the screen, maybe, if I can get it over. Okay. So we have our thesis. Like I said, yours can be a little bit different. Let's write the context now. That's not what I wanted to do. So if we're using these three things for the context, then what could you write? I would say maybe something like gunpowder empires were expanding through their use of gunpowder and force at this time. An example of those empires were the Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal. Then you could say, you could put Ivan the Terrible before that if you wanted to, and you could talk about Ivan the Terrible was Tsar before Peter the Great, and he expands Russian fur trade through his time frame. And then you could say Peter the Great comes to power by overthrowing his sister, and he was well-traveled, well-educated. He wants to modernize Russia to keep them competitive with Europe. Now, connect that somehow into your prompt before you go into your prompt, and you could say something, where did I put it? You could say, because of his travel and wanting to compete with the rest of Europe, he starts to modernize, and then go into your prompt, or your thesis, sorry. Okay, Ashley says, how can we get the unicorn point? We are asked to write about both. So what I'm saying is, you're only asked in the prompt to address change. But if you also add continuity, then that's how you could potentially get that unicorn point. So that's what I'm going to show you tonight. NNE says, gunpowder empire's inspiration towards Russia's modernization. Not as much as Europe. Okay, he's mostly looking at Europe as the reason he wants to modernize. Fatine says, just a moment. The AP test is online, so does it have to be written on the computer? Can it be handwritten? It can be handwritten. You will only have 5 minutes given to upload that handwritten essay. If you do not get it uploaded in that 5 minutes, like if your internet's slow or you have some kind of technical issue, then you could potentially just get a 0, because after that time frame, they won't take it anymore. So I would suggest typing it. A good way to do it would be to have 2 computers or 2 devices so that you could have, maybe some notes on one, or you could have those like handwritten, and then take the test on the other one. A couple weeks before the AP exam, I'm going to be going through some different study ideas about how you can organize your notes. Once again, you're not going to have a ton of time, so it's not like you're going to be able to look up a ton of stuff. But let's say that you're writing this and you're like, man, I just cannot remember what the gunpowder empires were. You might be able to flip to a part of your notes and remember Ottoman, Safavid, Mughal. Okay, so something fast like that would be good. Okay, let's keep going. So we have the thesis. We're going to start with paragraph 1. Now, you're basically going to break down your thesis in order to write that first topic sentence. So our first group is changes in education. So what I would suggest is something like, Peter the Great used his absolute rule to modernize and transform Russian education system. Boom. Then you're going to start talking about what it was like before the changes. So before these reforms, most of the population was uneducated. That is going to show change because you're talking about what it was like before. In document 1, a bishop from England describes how Peter the Great was interested in improving education of his people in the manner that England had been doing. So all I'm doing is using this information right here. That's describes. That's the describe part. Then I said he was even more interested in this than he was in learning the ways of war. Peter the Great was so set on encouraging learning that he sent some of them to travel to other countries in order to bring back knowledge to Russia. So this is the supports part, and that's what I'm using there. So basically, when you're writing your paragraphs, if you do this document well, you can just come back and use this same information. So that's your describes and supports. Then explaining, point of view. So you would say he's a bishop from England who believes that Peter the Great is trying to improve education, but doesn't care as much about religion or the ways of war. Since he is an outsider, he can be more honest with his opinion because he doesn't have to try to impress Peter the Great because he's not Russian. Basically, I'm just using this right here. Exactly, Ashley. Yes, you never quote. Never, ever, ever quote. You won't get points for quoting. So that's why I'm putting this in my own words. Okay. But you do need to say that this comes from document 1. You can do that 2 ways. You can say, according to document 1, blah, 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 blah. Or you can put document 1 in parentheses behind whatever you're talking about. Okay. You need to make sure and reference the document, though, or you won't get any points for it either. Ethan says, thank you so much for these live streams. I always watch the replays. Thank you, Ethan. I appreciate that support very much. I'm glad it's helping. And, you know, watching them as replays, that's great because then you can pause them as well. Fatine says, how many paragraphs should the DBQ be? In my opinion, you're going to have your thesis and your context. You can put that in 1 paragraph. Then each one of your groups are going to be 1 paragraph. If you put your outside evidence within that, then you can have 3 paragraphs, or you can put your outside evidence after. That's up to you. I'm going to show you how to kind of work outside evidence in. We haven't gotten to that yet. So make sure after you're done with document 1 that somewhere either you've said according to document 1 or at the end you've put it in parentheses. Either way is fine to address that you were talking about document 1. Okay? Then we're going to go on to document 2. Document 2 is a decree from Peter the Great that most noble children should learn math and geometry. Right here, just use the same thing that we put on our thing. He puts forth in the decree that this is of such high importance that children who do not learn these subjects will not be allowed to marry, which shows how important this change is. So that's the support part. That's the part that I pulled from the document, but notice I did not quote it. I put it into my own words, all right? No, you do not need a conclusion and no conclusions necessary. You have to get all your like English essay stuff out of your head because this is different. Okay, so this is describes and supports. We got that. Now I'm going to go on to the point of view if I can find it here. The point of view is from the Tsar of Russia, Peter the Great, who thinks that education is important because he's had the opportunity to travel throughout Europe and he has seen the advances that have been given through education. He wants his people to be able to compete. Okay, so that's explaining why he thinks this. He's the Tsar, he's upper class, he is educated himself. Would he feel the same way if he were not the Tsar and he was just a serf? Maybe not, because serfs have different priorities, right? They don't necessarily need to be educated. They need to work and provide food. So they have a different point of view. Okay. All right, so moving on to document 4, because remember, document 4 is in this same education group. So document 4, Peter the Great wants to open more factories and to educate the Russians to be master craftsmen the way that the foreigners are. This is my description, okay? He wants to establish more factories and teach Russians so that they will be able to compete with other parts of Europe. He opens it up to any class of people that participate because it is important to have more factories throughout Russia, and he respects foreign advice. So basically, I'm just talking about what the document is saying, okay? That I'm pulling that from it and putting it in my own words. Then the purpose of document 4 is to inform the people of Russia of this new mandate. He is the Tsar of Russia and rules with absolute power. Under his authority, the statute is written. This is important in order for him to ensure Russia's success on the world stage, or you can say that he does this to legitimize his power. Either one's fine. Fatine says, can you describe how to get the support point? Yes. Fatine, support is pulling something from the document that supports your topic sentence. So right now, what we're trying to prove is the changes that he makes in education, right? So you need to pull something from document 4 that's going to prove that. We already talked about what document 4 means. The describes part is main idea. Now we have to pull something, put it in our own words, and describe it. Support it. So listen to what I wrote for this and see if it makes sense to you. Let me find the supports part. So he wants to establish more factories and teach Russians so they can compete with other parts of the world. That's the describes part. That's the main idea. He opens it up to any class of people to participate because it's important to have more factories throughout Russia. He respects foreign advice and is bringing in foreigners to help with that process. Both of those things I pull from the document, right? Because it talks about how he wants prosperity for Russia. That's the first part that I talked about, how he wants to open more factories to make Russia better. I didn't say prosperity. I said make Russia better. What that does is it proves to the reader that you understand the document. So if you're using the exact same words of the document, then you can't prove to the reader that you know what that means, right? So you're taking something from the document, putting in your own words to support that idea that he's changing education. And the part of this is that he's, bringing foreigners in to teach the Russians to make them more prosperous. Does that make a little bit more sense? Let me know. Okay, now, outside evidence. Outside evidence is from your brain. This is an easy point to get if you've studied and you know a lot of information. One thing that I know about Peter the Great's reign is that he gets land from Sweden, kind of takes land from Sweden rather, and he builds St. Petersburg, which is this city that he does these awesome architectural projects in order to legitimize his power. And it's done after a European architectural style. So I could throw this in there and I could say that, after I've talked about the purpose, I've talked about this part right here. The purpose was to inform and legitimize his power. I could say another way that Peter the Great legitimizes his power was by building St. Petersburg. He does this in the European style of architecture. And one example of a place that he builds within St. Petersburg is the Winter Palace, which is this huge, ginormous palace, way too big for the royal family. Like, they don't need that much, right? It's huge, but it's really big and grand, and he spends a lot of money on it. This shows that he is powerful. You could say it's important for him to legitimize his power to show the people that they need to accept the changes that he's bringing to Russia in order to modernize it. So that's how I would throw in some outside evidence. That's not in the documents, but it's something that I know that goes with this topic. Let me know if that makes sense to you. Okay, good, Fatine. Glad that works. Okay, so let's go on to our next paragraph. Our next paragraph is going to be about the social changes, right? So you can say Peter the Great used his absolute rule to modernize and transform the culture of Russia through the social change of traditional dress to Western style dress. We're talking about what it was before. We're talking about what it was after. Super important that you do that. Okay, then we're going to go into our document. Our first one is document 3. So here's our stuff about document 3, and I deleted this over here, but you should have it written down. So we have document 3. Document 3 decrees that Russian cultural dress will no longer be allowed. If you don't want to use the word decree, you could just say document 3 brings into law that Russian cultural dress will no longer be allowed. That shows that you understand what decree means, okay? Then the next sentence, that's the describe part. The next sentence, I'm going to pull something from the document. So we're talking about this stuff right here. I'm going to say, rather, Western style dress only among the people. Sorry, that goes with describes. This is the supports. The change applies to all ranks of people. Russian dress of any kind, including coats, boots, and trousers, are not allowed. Even Russian saddles are no longer allowed. It was also put into law that women were only allowed to wear Western dresses, and cultural Russian clothing and saddles were no longer allowed to be manufactured. Okay, so I'm pulling this out of the document, putting it into my own words. That's supports. Let me know if you have more questions about that, if it doesn't make sense. Okay, then we explained this as audience. We said the audience was the Russian people. So you could say this document was written for the Russian people so that they would know that the new law about dressing in the Western style. He is Tsar of Russia, and therefore he gave them no choice in the matter, which shows his power. That could work for audience or purpose, either one. But you can't double dip. You can't do both. Okay? All right. Then we're going to hop to document 5. Now, at this point, if you're running out of time, let's say you only have 10 minutes left, and you're like, crap, I only have 10 minutes left. What I would suggest is that you throw in that extra outside evidence, because we already have 4 documents described, so that would get you that point if you did it right. We already have 4 documents supported, so that gets you that point. So try to get that outside evidence point, okay? So basically, you're adjusting how you're writing based on how much time you have left. And once it gets a little bit closer to the exam, you can practice this with some of these DBQs. You could set your notes aside and do one of these DBQs again, or you could get a DBQ from online. Either way, just have one that you can practice and kind of time yourself so that you can adjust your time like that, all right? So let's say that I only had 10 minutes left. I would skip document 5 altogether, and I would start writing some more outside evidence. That way I could try to get that last outside evidence. But if we're on point, we got plenty of time, we would do document 5. So we're going to go ahead and do document 5 right now. It says, document 5 is a portrait of Peter the Great in Western style dress. There's my description. It looks similar to the portraits of European kings at the time. You could throw that in there if you want. Peter is dressed in Western style to identify with the changes that he wishes to make in Russia and lead by example. And then I could also put in, this shows his support and for the changes and legitimizes his power. Okay, that is all from like what you're seeing in that document. Then you could go with the purpose. Purpose was to legitimize his power and gain respect. The artist shows the picture of the sword and the cannon and the map to show Russia's greatness and Peter the Great's greatness. The teen says, basically, we have 45 minutes to write the DBQ. Do we get the extra 5 minutes to submit? Yes, that is my understanding from listening to what the College Board has put out so far. If that changes, I will definitely let you know. But from my understanding, you get 45 minutes to write it, 5 minutes to submit it. Now, like I said, if you're a decent typer, I would suggest just typing it, and then you don't have to worry about submitting it. Okay. Now, you could throw in some more outside evidence. Ashley was talking about the samurai. You could compare these modernization changes to the Meiji Restoration and how the samurai were outlawed and the whole fight that happens with that. You could talk about other reforms that Peter the Great made. For example, he changed the calendar. It was according to Adam's birth, and he wanted it to be more European style, so he changed it to the European calendar, which goes with Jesus's birth. You could talk about that. Anything outside of the documents that you know that relates to this, that's what you could put in there. Okay. And if you've got any other ideas about outside evidence, let me know, and we will talk about it real quick. And then that very last point, we were talking about the uniform point. Once again, this is not in the documents, so I'm not sure if they would give you the points for it or if they would just count it as more outside evidence. It probably depends on how well you write the rest of the DBQ, because the complexity point or the uniform point kind of like wraps around that whole DBQ, and it's basically granted if your DBQ is really good. But if one of the criteria is that if you talk about changes, you also talk about continuity. If it doesn't have to be in the documents, then we could talk about the continuity of serfdom. So you could say something like, despite all these changes, one institution remained the same, and that was serfdom. Serfdom had existed in Russia since the 17th century and continued through Peter the Great's rule. Because Peter the Great needed money, he eventually instituted a head tax, which oppresses the serfs even more and drives them further into debt. Serfdom wouldn't be abolished until 1861. Okay. Now remember, continuity has to be the same in whatever time frame you're doing. We're doing Peter the Great's rule, so it would be until 1725. Serfdom lasts until 1861, so that one would work. So Fatine, yes and no. I'm not sure if they're going to give you the 50 minutes if you're typing it. I don't know exactly how that's going to work yet. I think how they're going to do it is like cut off the test, like cut off the typing test at 45 minutes. And then if you're not typing, give you 5 minutes to upload it. I'm just not positive about that. I'll have to get back to you. They're supposed to be giving us some practice module tests that your teacher will be able to give you access to, but that hasn't happened yet. So that question will be answered when we get those practice tests. And then it says, would you put that continuity in the same paragraph? It doesn't really matter as long as it's there. And as long as you're addressing it as a continuity. If you want to make it a different paragraph, that would be fine. Either way is okay. Pretty much when they're reading this, they're going to look for information everywhere. And sometimes when I've been out reading the test, sometimes if the information isn't in the exact right spot, it can still count for something. So don't get too super stressed out about that. I suggest organizing your paper, describe, support, explain, just because that's how we're writing the notes when you're looking through your documents. So it's just easier because basically if you know what these documents are and how to support it and what group, this is basically your paper right here. You just have to write it real quick. So you get 45 minutes to write. Yes. But Fatine, that's including looking at your documents. So you don't get like 15 minutes to look at your documents and then 45 minutes to write. 45 minutes is for all of it. And if you notice, we've already been on here an hour. Now, we didn't get started right away. If we would have went straight through, we could have probably gotten done in 45 minutes, but it's definitely pushing it. It's a short time frame. However, the better you do on this, writing it will be easy because you're just taking these notes and you're putting it into full sentences. So even if you're taking 15 minutes to do this, you should still be able to get it written in 30 minutes if this is done well. All right, then a couple of reminders. Here are the describes is the main idea, supports connecting what the document says with your argument to try to prove your thesis. So you're basically proving that group. Okay, we were proving the changes of education. We were proving the changes of culture. Then here's the questions that you ask yourself for explaining the document. I'll let you read those. I don't need to read those out loud. Okay, so NNE says, would you literally state in order to show education changes? You could. I mean, here's the thing. You're not going to be taken, they're not going to take points off because it doesn't sound as eloquent as someone else, right? Now, you might not get that complexity point. The complexity point is the one for a really well-written essay, and they take all that stuff into account when they're giving you that point. But that point's super hard to get anyway. So if you get all the other 9 points, then you're already doing a lot better than the average AP student. So if you want to say that, you could, or you could just word it like, how did I word it? Let's see. You could word it like a little bit more eloquently, like I said, in document 4, Peter the Great wants to open more factories and educate the Russians to be master craftsmen. So I'm throwing in the word education. I'm tying it to what I'm arguing, but I'm not necessarily saying it shows this. But you could say that. I mean, there's nothing that says that you can't say that. Fatine says, how much time do you suggest to read all the documents? I would say 10 to 15 minutes. That's what you want to try to do. So what I would suggest that you do is go back over some of the ones that I've already done. I've done Unit 1, Unit 2. You can pause the video. You can time yourself and see how long it takes you to get through the documents. You can practice with other documents. Depending on what textbook you're using, there are a lot of documents that you can just practice reading and practice figuring out what they mean, figure out the describes part, figure out one of these, and practice that. You won't be able to do a supports unless you have a question to go along with it, but you can definitely practice these 2 things. And if you're, I don't know, I don't think any of you are in my class specifically, but you can email me, and I'll put my email address up here, and I can give you some more practice stuff as well. Also, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but you can Google AP World past exams, and I think there are 3 right now. We'll probably be going over those at some point, the DBQs. Now, keep in mind that the DBQs are going to be the old version, so they're going to be 7 documents. You only are going to have 5 on this one, but you can still look over those, and you can even Google examples of well-written ones and what it takes to get certain points, because they put those out every year. So that might be something that you could do if you have time. And NNE says, so we can say what explanation, historical context, audience, etc., that we use within the paragraph. Yeah, absolutely. I would come right out and say the point of view of this document is blah, blah, because you don't want the reader to miss it. And if you say the point of view is, or the document is written from the point of view, or the document is written for the audience of, then it's going to be hard for that reader to miss it. The only thing that I want you to make sure you remember, though, is to answer the why part. Why is it important that we know the purpose? How does that affect the document? Why is historical context of the document important? Why does it matter that we know the audience? And then for this one, why do they believe that way? What outside the document, what of these things right here is affecting that document being written? For example, I'm a woman. I'm going to have a different opinion than a man is going to have. That's just how it is, because I've had different experiences. So if I'm writing something, my opinion is going to be swayed by what gender I am. My point of view is going to be different. So why is that important that you know that? Well, maybe I'm writing about men and I don't understand the topic because I'm not a man. Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to make sure and explain this why part. Why does it matter? Okay, Nick says, hello, I have a question about a simulation for the AP World History test. Is the College Board doing one before the real thing? Yes, they are supposed to give us access to some simulations before the test. We have not gotten access to them yet, but it should be coming at least by the first week of May, I would think. So stay posted to that. Ask your teacher. I'll also probably be doing some things about it on here if I can. or I'll at least announce it and let you guys know, hey, your teachers have access to this through the College Board website. One thing you can do to prepare for that, though, is make sure you have your username and password to get into the College Board website, because that's how you're going to access your test. So you signed up for that at the beginning of the year. Just make sure that you can get into that. And if you forget your password, there's a reset password thing on the website. And then Ashley says, how do you access the AMSCO book? That I only have access to it for HISD students. Are you an HISD student, or are you in a different district? If you're HISD, you can email me and I will give you access to it. If you're not HISD, then you can ask your teacher to email the publisher, and they may be able to get access to it. It just depends on if your district has purchased the book or not. So just let me know about that. Okay, guys, well, I am going to wrap this up for the evening. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure and do so and hit that thumbs up, because it helps the channel out a lot. And if you have any further questions, you can email me. My email address is right here. I'd be more than happy to get back to you. NNE says, I saw in AP Classroom that they have optional testing sections that give you an example of how the test is like, but I don't think it's a simulation. Huh, that's interesting. I'll have to log into AP Classroom and see where that's at. That will probably give you examples of what the DBQ could look like, maybe. Can you actually type in on, or does it just give you information to read? That would be kind of interesting to know. But you can simulate this on your own too. You can grab one of these DBQs that we've done throughout the weeks and practice it again, and then time yourself. What I would suggest is to maybe have it open on one computer. If you have another computer that you have access to, type it on another computer so that you can have it, open, and you can kind of toggle back and forth. Now, one thing to note, though, that they said that if you pull it up on one computer, you have to also do it on that computer. You have to take the test on the same computer. All right. So actually, maybe don't simulate it that way, because you have to do it on the same computer. Now, you can have another computer sitting beside you if you want to Google something real quick. That's okay, but you're not going to have a lot of time to do that. That's why they gave you such a short time window, because they don't want to give you a ton of time to be able to Google stuff. You still have to know information in order to know the outside evidence and whatnot. Okay, and then he says, yes, you can do an actual DBQ. Okay, great. So that's what I would suggest. Get into AP Classroom and see if you can figure that out. I will check that out as well and see what that's like, and practice those. If you're not in my class and you want access to getting it graded, you could potentially email your teacher and ask them to look over it. If they're not available to do that, you can always email me what you wrote and the prompt and stuff, and I can check it out for you too. I'd be more than happy to do that. All right, next. Oh, awesome. I'm so glad these are helpful to you guys. I really enjoyed doing them. I miss being in the classroom every day, and so it's kind of nice to be able to do it on YouTube. It's not quite the same, but I'm really glad it's helpful to you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in. Next week, I will be back at 7 p.m. Central to go over Unit 4 DBQ. We'd love to have you, as well as on Tuesday mornings at 9:30 a.m. Central. I do Jeopardy live games with my class. You're more than welcome to join in on that as well. You just hop on YouTube and you'll see a live pop up. All right, guys, I am out of here for tonight. Thank you again for listening, and have a good one. I'll talk to you all later.